Oh, yes, you'll be back.
We'll just do another 6 weeks.
Let us know.
That's right. That's fine with me. Okay, we left off here Country Rock last week. Are there any other songs that you'd like to hear just before we start off? Give you one more freebie.
What is the weight?
We did play that last week.
I thought sounded familiar, but I didn't.
Yeah, it's because the title is weird. The weight never appears in the title.
Yeah.
Put your load right on me. Okay, if you don't want anything, then we'll move on. Whoops, whoops. No. Okay, Southern rock is a subgenre of country rock. You know, researching where these titles can come from and what the opinion is really, really hard. It's hard. We know bluegrass came from Bill Monroe, but other than that, how far south do you go? But here are the examples that were given to me. It may have been coined in 1972 by this guy who writes in Atlanta's underground newspaper. But Lonnie Mac's Memphis, that's Chuck Berry's song, hello, information, please, is considered the prototype of a Southern rock song. I don't get that. Chuck Berry wrote a rock and roll song, then maybe Chuck Berry should get credit for it. The Allman Brothers, Ramblin' Man, Creedence Clearwater Revival, Fortunate Son was very popular. I love Devil Went Down to Georgia with the fiddle competition. Anything by Leonard Skinner, ZZ Top, love that their stuff too, and Marshall Tucker. So, what would you like to hear?
Mm.
Devil.
The devil went down to Georgia, he was looking for a soul to steal. He was in a bind because he was way behind and he was willing to make a deal. When he came across this young man sawing on a fiddle and playing it hot, and the devil jumped up on a hickory stump and said, boy, let me tell you what. I guess you didn't know it, but I'm a fiddle player too. And if you'd care to take a dare, I'll make a bet with you. Now you play pretty good fiddle, boy, but give the devil his due. I bet a fiddle of gold against your soul, cause I think I'm better than you. The boy said, my name's Johnny, and it might be a sin, but I'll take your bet you're gonna regret, cause I'm the best as ever been. Johnny, rosin up your bow and play your fiddle hard, cause hell's broke loose in Georgia and the devil deals the cards. And if you win, you get this shiny fiddle made of gold, but if you lose, the devil gets your soul. Opened up his case and he said, I'll start this show, and fire flew from his fingertips as he rosined up his bow, and he pulled the bow across the strings and it made an evil hiss, and then a band of demons joined in and it sounded something like this. When the devil finished, Johnny said, well, you're pretty good, old son, but sit down in that chair right there and let me show you how it's done. Fire on the mountain, run, boys, run. The devil's in the house of the rising sun. Chicken in the bread pan, picking out dough. Granny, does your dog bite? No child, no. The devil bowed his head because he knew that he'd been beat, and he laid that golden fiddle on the ground at Johnny's feet. Johnny said, "Devil, just come on back if you ever want to try again. I done told you once, you son of a bitch, I'm the best there's ever been." He played Fire on the Mountain, Run, Boys, Run. Devil's in the house of the rising sun. The chicken in the bread pan, picking out dough. Granny, where your dog bite, no child, no.
Great start. It's really awful because I could play all of these and be very happy with it, but we got to learn something here today. So anyway, I would love to play more of these, but I had floating thing. But these are some of my choices, and these are the groups that my research said were top Southern rock, and I love all of them. I really do. 38 Special, I think, should be on there too. They were a Southern rock group, but I have Allman albums and Leonard Skinner albums. Does anyone know what Leonard Skinner means?
Yes. Yes. Leonard Skinner took its name from the group's high school chemistry teacher.
Okay.
Chemistry teacher.
Okay.
Whose name was Leonard Skinner, written spelled
phonetically.
Way.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It was their chemistry teacher.
Okay.
And I also have
I didn't know that.
That I personally believe that the best damn Allman Brothers song ever was Tied to Hitching Post. Oh, that's it.
Yeah. Okay.
Great.
Yeah, and it's a real rocker.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So just one.
Any other questions or comments? Love to play more, but we're here to learn something. So, okay. Skiffle. Does anyone remember from the Beatles class what skiffle is?
Mm-hmm.
And this is a subgenre, and it had an influence. Those of you who haven't heard this rap, it's African American blend of folk blues, jazz. Was imported to the UK in the mid 50s. It's going to have a tremendous impact in the UK. Lonnie Donegan. It's been seen critical to the British blues boom, and then subsequent British invasion, that skiffle doc. And has everyone seen this before? Anyone who has not seen this slide before?
This slide.
Okay, then I'll play this. This is very popular song that Lonnie Donegan did.
Oh my God.
And you want to see it again anyway. And you can sing along if you want.
Oh me, oh my, oh you, whatever shall I do? Hallelujah, the question is peculiar. I give a lot of dough, if only I could know. The answer to my question is it yes or is it no? Don't you chewing gum lose its flavor on the bedpost overnight? If your mother says don't chew it, do you swallow it in spite? Can't catch it on your tongue, can you hear it left and right? Don't you chewing gum lose its flavor on the bedpost overnight? One night old Granny said, stuck gum all round her bed. Plastic rollers, all that chewing without molars. A prowler in the night got stuck on Gran's bed, right? Old Granny leapt up in the air shouting out, tonight, tonight! Does your chewing gum lose its sticky on the bedpost overnight? Does it go all hard, fall on the floor and look a nasty sight? Can you bend it like a fish hook just in case you get a bite? Does your chewing gum lose its flavour on the bedpost overnight?
Hey, Lon, here, hang on, listen, Is a gold tooth a flash in the pan?
Is a gold. Will you play your bass?
Well, no, hang on, listen.
What
No,
do you
hang
want
on.
now?
I want to know if I crossed a kangaroo with a turkey, could I stuff it from the outside?
I'll stuff you from the outside. Play the bass!
Now listen.
Oh, he's back,
Oi.
he's back.
No, well look, if Tutankhamun got sick, will I call his mummy?
You better call your mummy, you're playing any more of that rubbish. Go on, play it! The convict out on bail said put me back in jail. Rang the knocker, he must be off his rocker. Then back in his old cell, the reason he did tell, his gum was stuck above his bed when he thought he was well. Does your chewing gum have more uses than it says upon the pack? Can you stretch it out much further than the man up on the rack? Can you lend it to your brother and expect to get it back? Do you sure you don't lose its flavour when your lips refuse to smack?
It's a long solo and more bad jokes, but you get the point. Oop, where we go? Does anyone remember when that was popular? Because there used to be a camp song. I remember my kids singing it going to camp. Yeah. Okay, I'll skip the documentary, but skiffle had a tremendous impact on this group. Who's this? Come on, if you took the Beatles, you know what it is. The Quarrymen. And who's the guy at the microphone? John Lennon. And the Quarrymen were a skiffle group. And if you'll notice in the background, they have the wash tub bass. You could hear the bass in the banjo in the Lonnie Donegan song. But the documentary shows that skiffle was African American music, cheap guitars, cheap banjos, wash tub bass, what are those washboard kinds of things. They couldn't afford fancy instruments, so they created this kind of music. It crossed the pond with Lonnie Donegan was very popular. He was popular in the States too. He did a couple of other songs. Also, Nancy Whiskey is another singer. I remember her. She did Freight Train, and that made the top 40, at least where I lived in the 50s. So tremendous influence on the Beatles. The Beatles started off as a skiffle group and then became the Beatles. And the blues followed. The Beatles did not bring the blues to England. It was the second British invasion. It was the Who, the Kinks, Eric Clapton, those folks who, and I think I showed you last week, Alexis Corner's Blues International, where they were meeting from the early 50s at a club in London playing blues in Ealing. Okay, and this was very popular. Let's do a little lecture on rockabilly. Oh, by the way, before we do that, who are those guys in the picture?
Elvis, Johnny,
Jerry.
Jerry Lee, and who's the guy by Jerry?
Well,
It looks like Bruce
What?
Springsteen.
that's a blue suede guy,
Yes,
original. What's
yes, original blue suede shoes. Gene Vincent.
Um,
This is called the $1 Million Quartet. And the story behind it very briefly is Elvis was already sold to RCA and was going nationwide. You know, Elvis was discovered by Sam Phillips in Memphis and Sun Records. Elvis's contract was sold for an outrageous $36,000 to Colonel Tom Parker, who made a gazillion dollars off of Elvis. However, the backstory that I do in my Beatles class is that this was a real gift for Sam Phillips. Sam Phillips died an extremely rich man. He invested in Holiday Inns. He was very rich, but he was broke at the time. He had Elvis and he didn't have anything else. With the money he got from Tom Parker, he started rockabilly. And when this picture was taken, Johnny Cash was totally unknown. He had not released a record. He was called at his home to come to be in the picture. Gene Vincent had blue suede shoes. Jerry Lee was starting to come through, Great Balls of Fire and so forth. But Sam wanted this picture, and this is the time they came together. And in the Beatles, in my rock history class, I play the songs that they're singing. It's horrible. I mean, there's just a little piano, guitar, and they're a little off key, but it's historic. It's very historic.
Carl Perkins. Wasn't he the blue suede shoes?
Carl Perkins, you're right.
Yes.
Yep, you're right. Darn. Why was I saying Gene Vincent?
But I think in that show, the $1 Million Quartet, those are the four.
Yeah.
Did you say Johnny Cash? The guy in the back is
Johnny Cash is against the wall. Yeah, I saw a musical at the Leeds Center several years ago, the $1 Million Quartet, and they had actors playing these characters and Sam Phillips and the songs and so forth. So what I'm going to do here is really frustrate you. I'm going to play you a minute or so of each of these songs. And these are, I tried to get live versions of it, but let's do the Rockabilly Lecture first.
I said at the beginning of this week's lectures that this era is basically divided up into the period before Elvis, and we talked about that, 1955. We talked about Chuck Berry, Fats Domino, Little Richard, Bill Haley, people like that. And then Elvis, which we've just gotten done talking about, and the importance of him, especially when he comes onto the scene in 1956 when he signs with RCA and they put all of their promotional muscle behind him, and he starts to have all this fantastic national success on all three charts. And then there's the period after Elvis, or after Elvis's initial success. So now we're talking about 57, 58, and 59. And that's what we're going to talk about now, the artists who were important during that third division of years that we're talking about in this relatively short period from 55 through 59 or 60. Let's stay with Sun Records for a minute and talk about some of the artists who were still at Sun after Elvis departed. The first of these is Carl Perkins, a singing guitar player who had a pretty good hit, a #2 hit with Blue Suede Shoes. In fact, even before Elvis did it, Carl Perkins had a record that was a hit on all three charts at the same time. But unfortunately for Carl Perkins, on his way to a television performance on the East Coast to promote Blue Suede Shoes, they were in a car accident. And nobody was killed, but as I recall, I think he busted a leg or something like that, and so couldn't perform for 4 to 6 weeks. So just when the song would have crested, maybe he could have put himself in a position to be a bigger star. He was laid up in the hospital and out of it for a month or two, and so that was really a sort of a bad turn of events for him. Interestingly, Carl Perkins was one of the favorite artists for the Beatles to cover later, and George Harrison was such a fan of Carl Perkins that when all the other guys early on in the band, when they changed their names to have stage names, Paul was Paul Ramon and John Lennon was Long John Lennon, George Harrison changed his name to Carl Harrison. Not exactly a dramatic change, but anyway, kind of cute and fun. Carl Perkins. Another one that was at Sun after Elvis, Johnny Cash, had a country and western hit in 1956 with Folsom Prison Blues, a song that we all think of now as a classic country hit. And then I Walk the Line in 1956 was on Sun Records, which was a country western pop crossover. That's something we haven't talked about yet. The idea that the song could be a hit first on the country western charts and then cross over onto the pop charts. Last week, we talked about New San Antonio Rose, which had originally been a hit for Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys, and then when covered by Bing Crosby, became a hit on the pop charts. But here, the actual Johnny Cash record moved over from country to pop. And then finally, maybe the biggest name and most successful name, at least for these years, after Elvis, is Jerry Lee Lewis, whose Whole Lot of Shakin' Going On was a big hit in 1957. Great Balls of Fire in 1957. After that, it was Breathless. I mean, Jerry Lee Lewis was in many ways very much like Little Richard, a pianist who sang and who was had a wild kind of act, although his was a little bit more sort of, southern white Louisiana as opposed to Richard's. But he was a fantastic performer, very charismatic. One other person that we should mention who was on Sun, and we'll talk about him next week, is Roy Orbison, who was here about this time. Now, in the case of Johnny Cash and Roy Orbison, they both went on to have their greatest successes after they left Sun Records. But you can kind of see, with all of these people going through the Sun Studios in Memphis, a small little independent label, there was an awful lot of talented people coming through Sun Records. Some of the other, what we call rockabilly artists, we talk about this Southern style out of Sun Records that Elvis and the rest of these artists were involved in, is rockabilly, the cross between hillbilly music and rock music, rockabilly. Maybe the most famous later exponent of rockabilly would be somebody like Brian Setzer, who still continues to record in the rockabilly style. Anyway, some important other rockabillys. Gene Vincent, whose Bebop-A-Lula was a hit on the Capitol label out of Los Angeles in 1956. Gene Vincent was signed by Capitol in the wake of Elvis to be their version of Elvis Presley. When once RCA had one, everybody had to have one. Eddie Cochran was signed by Liberty out of Los Angeles and had a hit with 20 Flight Rock in 1956 and Summertime Blues in 1958. Interestingly, those Eddie Cochran records were recorded in Gold Star Studios in Los Angeles, which would later, we'll talk about this next week, be a very important studio for Phil Spector and those Wall of Sound recordings. Both Gene Vincent and Eddie Cochran perform in a movie called The Girl Can't Help It, from 1956, which is sort of an upscale version of those Alan Freed movies I was talking about a couple of lectures ago, because there actually are real movie stars and there actually is a real story. This movie, The Girl Can't Help It, was a kind of a hit movie of the day, and Paul McCartney often talks about how influential that movie was and the performances in it, especially the Eddie Cochran performance of 20 Flight Rock. In many ways, Eddie Cochran and Gene Vincent were probably more influential in the UK, and that may be because they were so available to UK music fans through that film. But anyway, both of them had really big success in the UK, maybe bigger than they had in the United States. Now, right in this part of the course, we probably should talk about Ricky Nelson and the Everly Brothers in this period at the end of the 50s as other important rockabilly stars. But I'm going to save discussion of them for next week when we talk about music in the period between 1960 and 1963, because both Ricky Nelson and the Everly Brothers went on to have a lot of success sort of into that era. And so we'll save discussion of those. We'll double back and pick up on those guys when we get to that point. Let's talk a little bit about something I call rockabilly ladies. One of the things, we have to remember that when rock and roll was unfolding, people were trying various kinds of things. And one thing they thought is, well, if there can be a rockabilly Elvis, why not a female Elvis? That could maybe be something that we could sort of sell some records. And so Janice Martin actually was signed to RCA just weeks after Elvis Presley was signed to RCA to be kind of the Elvis, female Elvis. And so she had a single that came out called Drugstore Rock from 1956, so that gets kind of into the teen life. You go to the drugstore, the soda fountain there. But then she had a song called My Boy Elvis from 1956. Wanda Jackson had a tune, a bunch of sort of rockabilly tunes from that era, maybe the biggest one at the very end of this era called Let's Have a Party from 1960. She knew Elvis Presley personally, and he sort of talked Wanda Jackson into doing this sort of female rockabilly thing. But maybe the most interesting historically is Brenda Lee. Now, Brenda Lee went on to have tremendous success in the 1960s. Her song I'm Sorry was a fantastic country western hit and crossover. But when she was just 12 years old, in 1956, she was called Little Brenda Lee and recorded a tune called Bigelow 6-2000 that was markedly a female rockabilly tune. Now, these female rockabillys are now sort of a bit of a kind of footnote to the history, but it sort of shows you that the people in the industry didn't quite know what they were, they didn't know what they were doing, but they didn't know what would catch on, and so they tried a couple of different things, and this is one that probably didn't catch on so much, certainly didn't catch on like Elvis did. Well, the last figure I want to talk about in this lecture is Buddy Holly. Buddy Holly is a very important figure in this period, but comes at it pretty late in the game. In fact, Buddy Holly is somebody who also was signed in the wake of Elvis going to RCA as as a major label's version of Elvis, and that label was Decca. But let's say a little bit about Buddy and his background. Buddy, I think, as most people know, comes from Lubbock, Texas. As I said, signed to Decca in the wake of Elvis's RCA deal, but that initial signing with Decca went absolutely nowhere. They took Buddy off. I forget where they did the recording. Maybe it was in New York, and they did some recording, and nothing came of it. And so he went back to Lubbock. And back in Lubbock, he caught the attention of a producer, well, a guy who had some records on the chart himself, Norman Petty, who had his own recording studio in Clovis, New Mexico, who was kind of becoming a record producer, not unlike Sam Phillips at about the same time. He had some great equipment, some great ideas, was a very forward-looking kind of guy. So Buddy Holly and his guys used to go to Clovis, New Mexico to record almost everything they did. So almost all of those recordings that you know, the classic Buddy Holly recordings, were all recorded in Clovis, New Mexico, and engineered by and produced by Norman Petty. There's a time difference of 1 hour between Lubbock and Clovis, and so the Buddy Holly and his buddies, and I think the distance between the two is about 100 miles. You can check on a map and see. But the story is that long stretch of flat highway. The band used to like to leave Texas and try to arrive in Clovis before they left Texas. So that meant sometimes having to do 70 or 80 miles an hour, maybe 90 or 100, depending on what the distance is there. That gives you some idea of the wide open spaces of what we're talking about here. Well, with those recordings from Clovis, New Mexico, they got interest in two labels. Well, one label first, Coral, who ironically were a subsidiary of Decca. So Decca wasn't holding anything against Buddy Holly for the first one not working out. But what they decided was an interesting kind of promotional trick. They decided that some of the records would be released as Buddy Holly on the Decca subsidiary Coral, and some of the others would be released as the Crickets on the Decca subsidiary Brunswick. I guess the idea is that you could have one artist being two different bands and on two different labels and be able to maybe have more chance of getting onto the charts or getting more records into radio play and that kind of thing. And so anyway, that's what happened. So if you really want to get picky about it, the tunes that we really think of as being Buddy Holly tunes, some of them were Buddy Holly tunes, some tunes, strictly speaking, were Crickets tunes, although now in all anthologies they're basically thought of, as Buddy Holly and the Crickets. Same guys, same studio, same everything on most of them. Again, an important songwriter along with Chuck Berry, one of the important early songwriters, the Beatles, of course, and others, Bob Dylan, a lot of other 60s musicians were very much influenced by Buddy Holly and Chuck Berry. Some of the big representative examples of the Buddy Holly style, Peggy Sue from 1957, Oh Boy from 1957, Maybe Baby from 1958. Buddy Holly was much covered by other artists, so we've got the Beatles doing Words of Love, the Rolling Stones doing Don't Fade Away, Linda Ronstadt doing It's So Easy, and lots of others later. Buddy unfortunately died early in a plane crash. It was February the 3rd, 1959. I think he was only 22 years old when he died. Don McLean, later in 1971, in a song called American Pie, talked about that as the day the music died. The idea that rock and roll and its original incarnation, this era that we're talking about from 55 up to this point, basically died the day that Buddy Holly went down in that plane. And so what we want to do is in the next segment talk about what happened at the end of this period in 1959. At this point, rock and roll, it turns out, was in certain kind of trouble. There had been a lot of pressure that rock and roll was a negative influence, and this pressure was really starting to threaten the possibility of rock and roll continue. So in the next video, let's find out what happened at the end of the decade when rock and roll was in such trouble.
And those of you who took my music courses know what happened. And the music didn't die, it came back. So I forgot what this is. Is this a highlight thing?
In Nashville as one of the most important publishers when Nashville became the center.
This is his next thing, and I'm not going to do it because we're running out of time and there's a lot of coverage here. But I'm going to play a few minutes of each of these. I tried to get live performances rather than just watching labels because I want you to see what some of these folks look like. And appearing on Perry Como's weekly show, Ed Sullivan's weekly show, and so on and so forth. So let's just give them a few minutes to find my cursor here. Come on, come on. Shoot. Ah. So where are we? All right, let's try again.
Oh, no.
What is?
Can Lori help?
Should you click on the blue title? Looks like shoes up there.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Oh,
The record has sold, what, about 1,200,000 copies, right?
That's right, it makes me happy.
Well, I'm sure you are very happy about it, Carl. Is your trio ready?
I can get them ready.
Would you please? Friends, here he is. Very nice to have Carl on the show. Carl Perkins and the trio stepping out in their blue suede shoes.
Not a trio.
Two for the show. Three to get ready. Now go, cat, go, but don't step on my blue suede shoe. Well, you can do anything but lay off my blue suede shoe. Yeah, you can knock me down, spit in my face, slap my name all over the place. Do anything you wanna do, but honey, lay off of them shoes, don't you step on my blue suede shoe. Yeah, you can do anything but lay off my blue suede shoe.
Anyone ever see blue suede shoes? I mean, see someone wearing them?
Yeah, I used to have some.
Seriously?
Seriously, yeah.
I never ever saw blue suede shoes.
well,
I remember white bucks. I remember desert boots, but I never saw ever.
Shade of blue
They were blue.
Was it dark blue, light blue?
not like blue, dark blue, just blue,
Blue suede.
like the
yeah.
wall.
Wow.
They're the only pair ever made.
Oh boy,
Oh boy, he's right. Come on.
you should get a prize.
This is the Everleys. Come on. This is not my day.
Hello, loneliness. I think I'm gonna cry. Bye bye, love. Bye bye, sweet caress. Hello, emptiness. I feel like I could die. Bye bye, my love. Goodbye. There goes my baby with someone new. She sure looks happy. I sure am blue. She was my baby. She said goodbye to romance that I might have been. Bye bye, love. Bye bye, happiness. Hello, loneliness. I think I'm gonna cry. Bye bye, love. Bye bye, sweet caress. Hello, emptiness. I feel like I could die. Bye bye, my love. Bye bye, my love. Bye bye, my love.
Okay, I'm hitting escape and nothing is happening. I want to share. Let's go here and up here. I really like the Everly Brothers. I love their harmony.
yes.
This is Roy Orbison without glasses.
Oh dear. He needs to come back.
was on American Bandstand, so he was mouthing the words. They never played live on American Bandstand. No one ever did. They all were singing to their records. And sometimes the record ends and they're still talking, or they stop talking and stop mouthing it.
It's worth noting that Roy Orbison was one of the traveling Wilburys with George Harrison and Tom Petty and a whole bunch of other Bob Dylan. Yeah, a bunch of people. They made
Jeff Lynne. Did you mention Jeff Lynne? Jeff Lynne from ELO. I love the Traveling Wilburys.
Yeah,
there's a video of them. It's a short documentary of them. Tom Petty pulling up in his white Corvette, and they get out, and Dylan wrote most of the songs, but there are almost all of the songs have videos that you can watch, and and their voices are so distinct. You can tell that's Roy Orbison. You can tell that's Bob Dylan. It's just very cool. Very cool. Okay, this is Eddie Cochran's Summertime Blues. And what was interesting about this, as I found out, this is the first record by a rocker who played all the instruments and produced it all by himself in the Gold Star studio. Rockers were not, they laid down tracks and then the engineers or the producers or whoever would do it. He played all the instruments and did everything on it. And this is his signature song.
I'm gonna raise a fuss, I'm gonna raise a holler about a working all summer just to try to earn a dollar. Yeah, every time I call my baby, try to get a date, my boss says, no die, son, you gotta work late. Sometimes I wonder what I'm gonna do, but there ain't no cure for the summertime blues. Oh, well, my mom and papa told me, son, you gotta make some money. If you wanna use a car to go a ride next Sunday. Oh, well, I didn't go to work, told the boss I was sick. Now you can't use a car cause you didn't work a leg. Sometimes I wonder what I'm gonna do, but there ain't no cure for the summertime blues. I'm gonna take 2 weeks, gonna have a fine vacation. I'm gonna take my problem to the United Nations. Well, I called my congressman and he said, quote, I'd like to help you, son, but you're too young to vote. Sometimes I wonder what I'm gonna do, but there ain't no cure for the summertime blues.
And of course, it was covered by Blue Cheer and Another Dimension.
Are you ready? House America, come on, Blue Cheer.
You can see why they're called hair bands.
all I wanted to say was get that hair out of your.
No, they're called hair bands. That's a subgenre, but it's mostly a psychedelic kind of sound.
Yes.
Who?
Yes. Yes.
The Who, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, does anyone remember? I remember My Boy Elvis. Do you remember it? My Boy Elvis.
Yeah.
Everybody, come on down. The man with the guitar just hit town. Takes off like a rocket, there he goes, rocking from his head down to his toes. My boy Elvis, real rock. My boy Elvis, real rock. With babbling, ooh, Elvis, sing to me. Heartbreak Hotel, blue suede shoes. He walks away with all my blues. Take my troubles, take my pain, load 'em on that mystery train. My boy Elvis, real rock. My boy Elvis, real rock. With babbling, ooh.
Well, we get it. I remember when it came out. but I don't remember her being. You've never heard of her? I remember the song came out, and this is "Let's Have a Party" with Wanda Jackson. Of course, she became a very famous country and western. Is she still alive?
I think she is, yeah.
I think so.
In fact, she was in Kansas City maybe 25 weeks ago.
Okay.
Memphis.
Okay.
Some people like to rock, some people like to roll. Moving and a grooving, gonna satisfy my soul. Let's have a party. Woo! Let's have a party.
Honky tonk.
Send to the store, let's buy some more. Let's have a party tonight. I never kissed a bear, I never kissed a goon. But we can shake a chicken in the middle of the room. Let's have a party. Woo! Let's have a party. Send him to the store, let's buy some more. Let's have a party tonight.
She's still alive. She was born in 1937.
Wow. And here's little Brenda Lee.
I'm sorry, so sorry that I was such a fool. I didn't know love could be so cruel. Oh, 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 yes. You tell me are part of being young, but I don't right the wrong that's been done. I'm sorry, so sorry. Please accept my apology, but love is blind, and I was too blind to see. Oh, 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 yes.
I was intimidated by her. She's a year younger than me, and she sounded like my mother. She had this voice coming out. Like, I couldn't date someone like this. It would not happen.
Same voice, the effect of like Patsy Cline and
Yeah.
White Rabbit Janice.
No,
Grace Slick.
Grace Slick. Yeah.
I mean, it's just so complete.
Yeah, beautiful voices.
Amazing.
Absolutely beautiful voices. And this is, buddy, let's see, That'll Be the Day was the Crickets. I had both. The Crickets were on Brunswick and Eddie was on Coral, but they had a falling out with Norman Petty. He was ripping them off, and that's why Buddy split from the Crickets, and they were ready to come back together. If you watched the bio about Buddy Holly, he's on the phone as he's in South Dakota getting on the plane to fly, that they finally are going to get back together, the Crickets and Buddy can play because of they're dealing with the producer, but it didn't happen. Cursor, come on. Jeez.
Well, that'll be the day when you say goodbye, yeah, that'll be the day when you make me cry. You say you're gonna leave, you know it's a lie, 'cause that'll be the day when I die. Well, you give me all your loving and your turtle doving, all your hugs, your kisses, and your money too. Well, you know you love me, baby, till you tell me maybe that someday, well, I'll be blue. Well, that'll be the day when you say goodbye, yeah, that'll be the day when you make me cry. You say you're gonna leave, you know it's a lie,
And according to some folks, they were the first. They set the tone for the four-piece rock band with lead guitar, rhythm guitar, bass fiddle, which became bass guitar, and drums. Supposedly, that I don't know. They certainly had enough exposure. Anyway, so that's enough for rockabilly. I hope I didn't bore you too much with that because I really like it and I thought those songs were pretty cool. Let's do a little lecture on rhythm and blues. And basically, he's going to say what I had already researched before the lecture came up.
Be very loose. If a singer wants to add an about the growth of mainstream pop music in the period up to 1955, and we've talked about the development of country music up to 1955 as well, and the establishment of Nashville, Tennessee as the home of country and western music, bringing together country and western, and launching one of the first big stars of country music, Hank Williams, in the late 1940s, early 1950s. We now turn to the third style that I promised at the very beginning of this series, and that is the music of rhythm and blues. Now, the first thing I think it's important to say about rhythm and blues is that rhythm and blues is a way of describing a market category. It's a way of describing a demographic. Rhythm and blues was thought of as music made by and consumed by African Americans. It was music from and for black listeners and musicians. But inside rhythm and blues, there's a lot of different kind of music going on. So, as a sort of musicologist, it isn't so much it is a stylistic label, but it's a troubled one because its first definition seems to have to do with who's making it and who's consuming it, as opposed to the musical qualities that it has. Now, of course, the musical qualities are consistent, and it is kind of stylistic, but it's just important to say that it's a lot broader category than you might think just by looking at it. Now, we've talked about the different charts and the different markets. When we get into 1945 and forward, we're going to think a lot about how there were different charts that were for rhythm and blues music, for country and western music, and for mainstream pop. Mainstream pop being by far the biggest market, sort of the normative market, mainstream pop, and these two other niche markets, country and western music, which was originally called hillbilly records, and rhythm and blues, which were originally called race records. And it's important, I think, to point out that people will say, well, there's a certain amount of racism involved in this, and the truth is, I think that in fact there was a lot of racism going on in the country, but my experience is that people in the music business don't care so much about white or black or brown. What they care about is green. They will take anybody's money and they'll make it wherever they can. And so I don't think the music business is responsible for fostering this racism, but it certainly is accepting it and trying to exploit it for all it's worth by separating these charts out. And so rhythm and blues is separated out maybe a little bit more, well, probably a lot more drastically than country and western is that we were talking about just now. But it is important to understand that these charts were divided for the merchant's use and not really for the fans. That is, when we start to talk originally about magazines like Billboard and Cashbox, those weren't designed for fans to sort of buy and sort of see what the big hits were. They were designed for people who ran jukeboxes, or eventually for people who ran radio stations, for people who ran record stores, so they could know what records were hot, so they could make sure they had the records that everybody seemed to want to buy, had plenty of those on hand, but weren't stuck with a bunch of ones that nobody wanted anymore. And so you had a service that tried to provide a kind of a predictor, almost like a kind of a weather service for sales, and that's really what that was about. And so, from a pragmatic point of view, if you're in a black neighborhood and you're selling R&B records, and there's probably no likelihood that white musicians and white customers are going to come in to buy records from you, you don't really need to know what it is they're going to like, because you don't need to have that product on hand, and vice versa. As rhythm and blues starts to emerge from in our historical consciousness in the early 20th century, maybe one of the first important figures we need to think about is a guy by the name of W.C. Handy, who sold a lot of sheet music pre-World War I with songs like Memphis Blues and St. Louis Blues. But the first blues recordings we have date from the 1920s. And the biggest star of the 1920s, it's clear in blues music, is a singer by the name of Bessie Smith. Her Downhearted Blues from 1923 sold over 1 million records. Bessie's performances are, maybe, if you don't know her music, they're a little bit more polished than you might think would come from blues artists of the 1920s. We're so used to thinking of Delta blues and those recordings being a lot more sort of raw and rugged. But these are very, this is very sophisticated singing, and there's not much of the usual sort of guitar playing stuff on it. But in the wake of Bessie Smith's tremendous success, people started thinking, well, let's go out in the country and see if we can find people who can do this blues music, and we can maybe sell some records. And so one of the most famous of these musicians who's discovered during this period is Robert Johnson, another one of these guys who died very young, died in 1938 at a very young age. He's mostly associated with Delta or rural blues that came from the Mississippi Delta area or from places in the South that were not particularly built up or urban. The music will often feature one singer, maybe there'll be another person along with that singer, playing the guitar, maybe playing another instrument or banging, tapping their foot on the floor. And so that music tends to be very loose. If a singer wants to add an extra beat or an extra measure or whatever like that, no problem. They can just do it as the spirit moves them. They don't have to worry about coordinating with other musicians. So it's a very expressive, sometimes very raw sound. So Robert Johnson is really the true master of that. Probably the song you need to know, at least the one that hooks up mostly with what we're going to talk about in the history of rock, is his Crossroads Blues of 1936. Eric Clapton and Cream covered that tune in the late 1960s. And Eric Clapton, in many ways, is responsible for bringing to our attention the fantastic recordings of Robert Johnson, most of them that were done in a couple of years right there around 1936. There's also kind of a fun story, which is almost certainly not true, that Robert Johnson sold his soul to the devil to get his fantastic guitar playing skills. Met him at the crossroads and made a deal with the devil. Anyway, colorful story, but I don't think it probably worked out like that. At least we have no historical evidence to prove that it's true. As we go into the 1940s and the war years, jump blues starts to come in. Jump blues is a form of big band jazz. It's what happens when you can't afford to bring all those horn players around on the road anymore, and you break it down to just a couple of horn players, and you get this sort of jump blues style. And nobody was better at jump blues during the 1940s than Louis Jordan and his Timpani Five. And here's another case of a black artist crossing over onto mainstream pop charts. Those records of his, Caledonia from 1945 and Choo 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 Boogie from 1946, were big hits, not only on the R&B charts, but also on the mainstream pop charts. Well, in the next video, we'll see what happened with R&B in the time after World War.
Any questions or comments?
Saturday Night Fish Fry. Can't
With
forget
Chuck
that.
Haddix.
Louis Jordan.
With Chuck Haddix, yep.
Yep.
This previous video, this was a good segue. You referenced green. And this is just a reminder you have less than 9.5 hours.
Well, let's talk about the money part, because when I started researching these courses 6 years ago, I was contemptuous of commercialism in music. And like when I was in college, folk music was more pure than pop music. Well, it's all bullshit. They're all in it for the money. I mean, you can't make any money. That's a dead end. No one does it. So the commercial aspect, you do have to follow the money where it goes. Unfortunately. Any other questions or comments? Why don't we take a short break? Stretch.
No, I'm gonna say, so this is the quiz for today. If you look at this T-shirt and tell me what kind of music this represents.
Mine too. Okay, let's reconvene. Like I said, I've got 10 hours of stuff and 3 hours left to go. So, rhythm and blues is kind of a catch-all definition. It's, as he said, lyrical themes from the African Americans. But this is interesting. From the 60s and 70s, you know, we know the British groups are going to do it. The term rhythm and blues in the 70s was used to cover soul and funk, which I think soul is soul and funk, and rhythm and blues is rhythm and blues. But that's the way they're marketed. And then you get in the 80s, and look at this. They've got soul, pop, funk, disco, hip hop, and others in this thing called contemporary rhythm and blues. And as I think I told you, the New Yorker still, you know, I subscribe to the New Yorker, read it, and page 4, they have the highlights of what's going on in New York City, and R&B is, let's say, classical, rock, opera, dance, and they'll have R&B as a category, and it'll be usually a female singer doing something like that. So it's a kind of a catch-all. I'm going to skip the second part because this is his lecture from 45 on, which I just gave you the summary. It's going to get really foggy, but Jerry Wexler from Billboard is credited with, I couldn't find anyone else. He's credited with coining the term rhythm and blues, as we said, to change it from the race records. It was actually a category that was on the chart that said race record, and then they had pop records and they had country records. So let's take a quick look at this PBS R&B special, which I think is pretty good and less confusing than many. It'll give you some current people who are PBS legends who've done it.
The legends of rhythm, blues, and soul unite for an event 40 years in the making to benefit public television.
This is just highlights of the fundraiser. What's the group? Memphis. I think so. I don't know. Yeah. Who is that? I don't know either. I recognize the song. I think they sang it, but it doesn't seem to be there. Yeah, I didn't recognize who it was. Well, we got to move on. We got too much rhythm and blues. We got to get through folk music. And so there are two periods. First of all, let's go back to folk music was brought to America from Europe by immigrants, especially the Scotch Irish and Appalachia. A lot of our folk songs come back from England, Ireland, and other European countries. But there was a folk movement roughly 1935 to 48. Who is that guy with the guitar on the left? Woody Guthrie. This machine kills fascists.
And I want to, here's a shout out to the Woody Guthrie Museum in Tulsa.
Tulsa, right.
You can get really fabulous t-shirts with the guitar and that slogan on it. And I am a proud owner of one. As my brother. Yeah, I did. But I'll wear it next week.
Okay. And then the folk revival that I remember, 1958 to roughly 65, but it went on like through my college years, basically. And I was a big fan of less so Peter, Paul, and Mary, but a subcategory of this folk music is protest music. And I have a lot of protest albums, Tom Paxton, Phil Oakes, Barry Maguire's Eve of Destruction. I didn't do this subcategory, but I was really into protest music, and I was very active in the anti-war movement at the time. So there was, the Joan Baez, the Judy Collins kinds of folk music. That's very nice. But I was heavily into the protest end of it. So here's a quick summary of the folk scene chronologically. So we have Girl Ives, The Wayfaring Stranger in 1944, which was a pop-ish hit. Zena, Zena, Zena by the Weavers, and that's the Weavers in the picture over there, with Ronnie Gilbert, Pete Seeger, Lee Hellerman is the guy on the right, and I can't remember the fourth one. But they were very popular until they and Pete Seeger especially got crosswise with the House Un-American Activities Committee, which censored their music and ended their careers roughly around 51, 52. Then I remember when Harry Belafonte broke through with Deo, the Banana Boat song. Odetta, I've seen Odetta in person. I think I told you that I lived an hour and a quarter from Newport and went to the Newport Jazz Festival and the Newport Folk Festivals for several years. But the Kingston Trio's MTA song was the one. Oh no, Tom Dooley. Their Tom Dooley song was the one that really started the folk revival in the 50s. And the MTA song, of course, is the Metropolitan Transit Authority in Boston, which we had a lot of fun with because they told about Charlie going through Scully Square Station and these other places that haven't existed in decades. But yeah, Joan Baez. I had all of her early albums, Joan Baez in concert. So I like Peter, Paul, and Mary. They had huge with If I Had a Hammer. Bob Dylan had all kinds of stuff coming out at the time, and he was mostly protest stuff. Blowing in the Wind is really a protest song. It's not a folk song. And of course, Woody Guthrie. And this is an interesting song. I'll play with you. This is Arlo Guthrie and Friends singing This Land Is Your Land, which is a Woody Guthrie song that some folks think should have been our national anthem.
Mm-hmm.
But I decided
Woody Guthrie's voice.
a long time ago that I would starve to death before I would sing any such songs as that. The radio waves and your movies and your jukeboxes are already loaded down and running over with such no good songs as that anyhow. Woody Guthrie.
This land is your land, and this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters,
This land was made for you and me. Take it.
I've roamed and I've rambled and I've followed my footsteps to the sparkling sands of her diamond deserts, and all around me that voice was sounding, this land was made for you and me.
As I went walking, I saw a sign there, and on the sign it said no trespassing.
And on the other side, it didn't say nothing.
That side was made for you and me.
One bright sunny morning,
Know that voice.
by the shadow of the steeple, by the relief office, I saw my people as they stood there hungry. I stood there whistling. What did he whistle?
This land was made for you and me. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island.
From the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters.
This land was made for you and me. Nobody living can ever stop me, 'cause I go walking my freedom highway. Nobody living can make me turn back. This land was made for you and me. This land is your land, and this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream water. This land was made for you and me. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me.
Glad you enjoyed it. I thought you would. Okay, is there any other song you'd like to hear?
Daylight come and walk, Daylight come and one go home. Work all night on a drink of rum. Daylight come and we one go home. Stack banana till the morning come. Daylight come and we one go home. Come, Mr. Tallyman, tally me banana. Daylight come and we one go home. He said, come, Mr. Tallyman, tally me banana. Daylight come and we one go home. Lift 6 and 7 and 8 and bunch. Daylight come and we one go home. He said, 6 and 7 and 8 and bunch. Daylight come and we one go home. Hey! He said, hey! Daylight come and we one go home. Hey! He said, daylight come and we one go home. A beautiful bunch, a ripe banana. Daylight come and we one go home. I did deadly black tarantula. Daylight come and we one go
And more day and more day, oh, more day.
So Park College gave him an honorary degree in the early 70s.
Wow.
But I happen to be teaching there now, so he gave a speech at the commencement and so on. So, not a very good speaker.
Yeah, he was quite
was very interesting. So I got to meet him at a reception.
Wow.
So they were hoping,
Cool.
that, of course, that he might give us some money.
He was very active in the civil rights movement.
Yeah. I say, in our civil rights class, we're up to the early 60s, and there have been multiple references to Harry Belafonte being one of the spearheading.
He was out there, yep.
In New York.
Yeah.
For fundraising.
You know, it's interesting because I was reading the obituary of O.J. Simpson, who is just the opposite. He's the Oreo. You know, he wanted to live as a white person, and he never took part in civil rights activities. Just wanted to live as a rich white person. And yeah, but Harry Belafonte got his hands dirty. He marched with Martin Luther King. There were a lot of pictures, and he walked the walk, literally.
I saw Harry Belafonte in Venice, Italy. He was there with his wife and 2 children. They were dressed to the hilt. They looked just like they stepped out of a fashion magazine.
No. In Venice, wow.
How fun.
Okay. Okay, then on the right side, we've got what I call folkish music, which was more pop than anything, but these are the groups. Brothers Four, the Highwaymen, the Limelighters, the Women Folk, Chad Mitchell Trio, and the perpetually awful New Christy Minstrels. Oh man, I couldn't stand there to watch them on Ed Sullivan or something. They're named after Christy Minstrels, which was like 16th century English group, and they call themselves New Christy, and they're like 12 or 14 of them, and boring songs. Good time for one more if you want to hear something from the left side that you could be curious about.
I don't know, I can't remember Wayfaring Stranger by Drew Alive.
It's pretty boring.
Okay, well, if it's boring, never mind. I've just never heard it. And
I'm just a poor wayfaring stranger, traveling through this world of woe, and there's no sickness, no toil, no danger in that fair land to which I go. I'm going there to see my mother. I'm going there no more to roam. I'm just a going over Jordan. I'm just a going over home.
well, he was a talented guy, so that was a place.
Oh yeah, and this is 44, but I remember him singing in the 50s too. In fact, I have a once removed situation with Burl Ives. I grew up in Massachusetts, and we had a lot of friends who lived on the Cape Cod, and we visited. We didn't own any cottage, but we visited, and we had friends in Provincetown. And if you know Provincetown now, it's the gay capital of the United States. It was then too. It was really unusual. It was a safe place for gay people. In fact, I had colleagues at the high school that I taught at that the day summer break started, they headed to P-Town. And so my parents were very straight, obviously. went to a gay nightclub called Wuthering Heights, and Burl Ives was a regular there. Wuthering Heights was one of the many gay nightclubs, and because we were just tourists, and this was really strange, way out of our league. I mean, I didn't live in like New York or anything like that. I did have a gay friend when I was in college, but other than that, it was very distant. But Burl Ives was a regular. He was in P Town throughout the summer.
And he was an actor too.
That's right.
He played Big Daddy in Head on Horses.
Correct. Yeah.
Which is one of my favorite.
Okay. And this is a slide from my Sympathy of the Devil's music show. As I said, I went to the Newport Folk Festival. This is the one. This is 1959. What I think I told you, it was Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I had enough money for one night, and we would pick whichever night we had. But we would camp out on the beach, on Second Beach, and and stay there. And then during the day, they had workshops, and these were really cheap. They were 50 cents or so a token to get in. But it was created in '59 by George Wein, who was the founder of the Newport Jazz Festival, which was in Freebody Park. And so he decided to create a folk festival as well. And so that's a poster for it. I think we'll skip the documentary. I'm trying to get up to prog rock before we end the day today. Any questions or comments about the folk music scare of the 50s? That's what Tom Lehrer called it, the folk scare. Okay. And of course, we're going to do a little bit of Bob Dylan. I think we've already talked quite a bit about him if you don't know who he is or what he is. But Robert Allen Zimmerman, and Nobel Prize winner. And someone asked me to do a course on Bob Dylan, and I said I'd have a real hard time because there were periods of his music that I really liked, like this early stuff. I love Blood on the Tracks. And then there's, Slow Train a Coming with his gospel songs when he was going through that Christianity phase. And some of the other stuff is just weird. And I don't know if I want to put that much energy listening to things I don't like. I like listening to things I like. But anyway, here's Bob Dylan at Newport, 1965. The Paul Butterfield Blues Band behind him.
Once upon a time, you dressed so fine, through the bumps of dime in your prime. Then you, people call, saying beware, doll, you're bound to fall. You thought they were all hitting you. Everybody that was hanging out. Now you don't talk so loud. Now you don't seem so proud about having to be scrounging your next meal. How does it feel? How does it feel? On your but you know you only used to get juiced in the head. Nobody's ever taught you how to live out on the street, and now you're gonna have to get used to it. You say you never compromise with the mystery tramp, but now you realize he's not setting any alibis as you stare into the vacuum of his eyes and say, do you want to make her feel? How does it feel? How does it feel to be on your own with no direction home, like a complete unknown, like a rolling stone? Never turn around to see the frowns, the jugglers and the clowns when they're coming down to do tricks for you. Never understood that it ain't no good. You can't let other people get your picks for you. You used to cry the chrome horse with your diplomat, who carried on his shoulder a Siamese cat. Ain't it hard when you discover that he really wasn't where it's at, after he's taken from you everything he could steal? How does it feel? How does it feel to be on your own in no direction home, like a complete unknown, like a rolling stone?
Anyway, I'm sorry it's a little long, but it's good hearing him. Yeah. Okay, any other questions or comments about Bobby
Was
Dylan?
that the song when he won the record?
Yeah,
That very song there?
I think that was the one that they came out and then, yeah.
And surprised everybody?
Mm-hmm. Yep, and they booed and upclapped, and I was at Newport, but I was not at the concert that night. I was on the beach.
Doing what?
Whatever works, whatever's available. No, that was another part of town. Yeah, it was Freebody Park is where they had the concert. Then they moved it out of town when it got big. But Second Beach was right along the highway as you came in, and we had sleeping bags. I had a station wagon at the time, a 57 Ford station wagon, and I could put the seats down and put the sleeping bag inside and had shelter from any rain or anything like that. But yeah, that was a regular thing to go down to Newport. We also used to snorkel off of the at 40 steps along the cliff walk. Spent a lot of time in Newport. It was a nice alternative to the Cape. Okay, then obviously we had folk rock, and this is a huge category that I'm very happy with. I like folk rock a lot. It's well, we'll let the lecturer tell you how it came about from the Byrds and so forth. I like folk rock a lot.
Records out in America, well, mid-1960s, but he certainly wasn't the only one that was making a difference in sort of fending off, if you will, the British acts who were so dominating the charts during this period. Often together with the story that we've heard about Bob Dylan in the summer of '65, the Newport Folk Festival, Like a Rolling Stone, and all that went with that, we have to talk about the music of the Byrds, because it's sort of intimate, well, in many ways it's intimately related with what was going on with Dylan. The Byrds started by Roger McGuinn, guitarist, along with David Crosby, Gene Clark, Chris Hillman, and Michael Clark. That group, McGuinn and Crosby, emerged out of the Greenwich Village folk scene as many of the other musicians did. But at this point in time, there's kind of the beginnings of a real migration toward the West Coast in the music business. In fact, between the beginning of the 60s and the end of the 60s, you can really see the music business in this country really, in large part, migrate from New York to Los Angeles. There was a lot of natural attractions to Los Angeles. One of them is the television and the movie business were out there. And so there was a lot of sophisticated people out there who were involved with production. There were good recording studios, this kind of thing. And so McGuinn makes his way out to L.A., starts doing his folk routine, his folk act, doing traditional folk songs and also playing songs, Beatles songs, in his folk act, which I guess was a little bit strange for the day. But you could already see the beginnings of McGuinn wanting to go in the direction of what the Beatles did. The first collection, the first version of the Byrds was called the Beef Eaters, and they used to have a song that they did called Mr. Tambourine Man, which was a Dylan song, but it's a Dylan song that Dylan hadn't yet recorded. He'd done a recording of it, and as the story goes, Ramblin' Jack Elliott had been on the recording they'd done, and something about the playing on it was out of tune, and they decided not to use it. But the guy that was producing the Byrds at the time, Terry Melcher, got a hold of this recording, and the Byrds heard it, and so they started working up this version of Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man, initially doing it with an acoustic 12-string, very much, like a kind of folk revival group from the first half of the 1960s, New Christy Minstrels or something like that. But then A Hard Day's Night came out in the summer of 1965, and so the guys from the Byrds went to see A Hard Day's Night. First, like everybody else, they were totally enraptured by the Beatles and Beatlemania, and always going that this is fantastic. This is just what we want to do. We want to be just like these guys. But they noticed that in that movie, George Harrison is playing a Rickenbacker 12-string guitar. Now, McGuinn had been playing a 12-string acoustic guitar, but this Rickenbacker electric 12-string had 6 pegs. If you looked at it straight on, had 6 pegs just like a normal guitar, but if you turned it sideways, you would see there were 6 more pegs for the extra 6 strings that added up to 12, and there's George Harrison playing that. Roger McGuinn thought, that's fantastic. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get a guitar just like that. Well, it turned out Rickenbacker guitars were made right there in Southern California. He was able to go to a music store, and as the story goes, traded in, like, I don't know, an acoustic 12-string and a banjo or something like that for a brand new Rickenbacker guitar. They decided to do their version of Mr. Tambourine Man with that Rickenbacker electric 12-string guitar and that jingly, jangly sound of folk rock, which has been, emblematic ever since in the popular music business. You think about groups like R.E.M., Tom Petty, all that sort of jingle jangle. It all comes from that moment in 1965 when Roger McGuinn picks up the Hard Day's Night guitar and puts it on a Bob Dylan song, right, and plays a little introduction that he says is influenced by Jesu Joy of Man's Desiring by J.S. Bach, puts all these things together and creates this hit single, Mr. Tambourine Man, which goes to #1, released in April of 1965. So just at the same time as Like a Rolling Stone is on the charts, we've also got Mr. Tambourine Man, 2 Bob Dylan songs. Interestingly, one song written by Bob Dylan but not performed by him, and one song written by Bob Dylan and performed by him, sort of the 2 sides of what Dylan's career had been up to that point. An interesting element of that song, Mr. Tambourine Man, is not only that it combines a Beatles guitar, a Dylan song, and this Bach-influenced introduction, but also that it uses the same studio band as had worked with Phil Spector on his records. And in fact, it was some of the same guys who'd been on a Beach Boys session for a song called Don't Worry Baby. And when they were putting together Mr. Tambourine Man, these studio musicians remembered this, and Terry Melcher said, can you do the beat, can you do the feel from the Beach Boys tune? So they took the Beach Boys feel from Don't Worry Baby and put it together with what McGuinn already had on the tune, and that's what became Mr. Tambourine Man. You notice I'm talking about a studio band. The only person actually playing on Mr. Tambourine Man is Roger McGuinn from the Byrds. The rest are all studio musicians. The other Byrds members are singing, but in a couple of years when we talk about the music of the Monkees, when the Monkees music comes along in a couple of years, We'll talk about how people thought it was so inauthentic that the Monkees weren't even playing on their own records. But it turns out that when it comes to Mr. Tambourine Man, an iconic folk rock hit of unquestioned authenticity, it turns out that most of the musicians on the recording were studio musicians. Nevertheless, after that, the Byrds played on their own records and had subsequent hits with All I Really Want to Do. There's a fun story that has to do with Cher that I'll tell you about in just a minute. Turn, 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 a Pete Seeger song, which again went to #1 in the fall of '65. And 8 Miles High, which is a song that McGuinn said is about a cross-country airline flight, which would be 7 miles high, but that didn't scan so well as a lyric, so it became 8 miles high. But of course, 8 miles high, everybody thought they were drug lyrics. And so in fact, the song only got as high as #14 in the spring of 1966 and got pushed off the charts because a word went round to radio stations that it was a drug song. It's also very much influenced by the music of John Coltrane. There's a guitar lick on the 12-string at the very beginning, which is a quote directly from a John Coltrane track, India. I think it is there. So that's the story with the Byrds. Is taking this folk thing as Dylan was doing and really sort of turning it into that jingly jangly sound. Speaking of the jingle jangle, and I mentioned before the previous video that the producer Tom Wilson would become an important important part of this discussion. Let's talk a little bit about Simon and Garfunkel and how all that works out for them. Another important group here, coming out of New York City and actually staying in New York City. Well, it turns out that Simon and Garfunkel had actually been a kind of Everly Brothers kind of group back in the late 50s called Tom and Jerry. They had a mild hit with a song called Hey Schoolgirl. They even appeared on American Bandstand, right, as a kind of young teenage version of the Everly Brothers. But then they finished school and did other kinds of things, and then came back as part of the folk revival as Simon and Garfunkel, doing totally acoustic music. Released an album in 1964 called Wednesday Morning 3 a.m. It kind of flopped. It had a song on it called The Sounds of Silence, but it's not the version that you're used to hearing. Anyway, the album flops. Paul Simon goes off to England to sing. I think Art Garfunkel goes to graduate school, whatever, and so they're really not doing Simon and Garfunkel at the time. But when Mr. Tambourine Man hits, and when the Dylan tune hits in the summer of '65, Tom Wilson, the producer, remembers this album, this Wednesday Morning 3 a.m., which was on the same label as Dylan Columbia. And so without the knowledge of Paul Simon or Art Garfunkel, he brings studio musicians into the studio. They take The Sounds of Silence and they add to it electric guitar, bass, and drums. Now, how do you add something to a song that's already recorded? Well, you can tell if you listen to the recording that the first couple of measures of it are the acoustic guitar all by itself. That's how the musicians are able to pick up where the tempo is. And then after a couple of measures, the electric guitar comes in, the bass comes in, the drums come in. And so without their knowledge, this song was re-released in this country and actually became a big hit, a #1 hit in 1965. Imagine being Paul Simon and getting that phone call. Oh, listen, Paul, it's your record company calling. Guess what? You've got a hit in America. What do you mean I've got a hit in America? I don't have any records out in America. Well, and so that's the whole story. And so what Tom Wilson essentially did was took what was an acoustic folk song, added the electric guitars, bass, and drums to it, and really, that's the definition of what folk rock is. Well, Simon and Garfunkel went on to record an album, The Sounds of Silence, and that's the one you're probably familiar with in that version. Other songs like Homeward Bound from 1966 and I Am a Rock really kind of made them one of the most important acts of that era. Also coming out of L.A., we've got the Mamas and the Papas. Now, they also formed in New York, but again, like we talked about with the Byrds, moved to L.A., and they're a little bit latecomers to this folk rock thing. The group led by John Phillips, but having two men in the group and two females, so those are the Papas and the Mamas there, including Mama Cass Elliot, who was sort of, in many ways, the sort of star of the group, although a lot of the songwriting and harmonies, vocal harmonies and arrangements were done by John Phillips, one of the guys in the group. Their big hit, first big hit, California Dreamer, went to #4 in 1966, and their big #1 hit from '66 was a track called Monday. Another thing that began to happen among these folk rock groups is because the Byrds had so much success covering Dylan songs, other groups either covered Dylan songs or tried to imitate in their songwriting what a Dylan song sounded like. So there was a fellow by the name of Barry McGuire who had a #1 hit in the fall of 1965. So this is kind of just in months after the emergence of folk rock and Mr. Tambourine Man. This track is called Eve of Destruction. And the guy who wrote the song, P.F. Sloan, was essentially given the assignment, I think it was by Lou Adler at the record company, to basically write a song that sounded like a Dylan song that wasn't a Dylan song. So he wrote Eve of Destruction. Barry McGuire had a #1 hit with that one. The Turtles, another group from L.A., covered the Dylan song "It Ain't Me, Babe" and had a #8 hit with that in 1965. The Turtles, made up of dual singers Mark Volman and Howard Kalin, would later be known as Fluorescent Leach and Eddie, or Flo and Eddie, when they appeared on Frank Zappa albums and then had their own solo career in the 70s. But early on, they were the Turtles. "It Ain't Me, Babe" is a fantastic tune, but "Happy Together," their #1 hit from slightly later, 1967, is one of the classic American pop hits from the 1960s. So this in many ways wraps up our discussion of folk rock, but there were other elements of the American response that we can talk about in the 1960s. And in the next video, we'll turn to the legacy of Phil Spector.
No, we won't. I don't like Phil Spector.
Yeah, but he made great music. He was psycho, but it's really good.
He was our psycho, yeah. I do a little biography of him in, I guess it's Sympathy for the Devil's Music, I think. But yeah.
And let me ask you, where is Gordon Lightfoot in all this?
Good question.
Good question. Well, he should be a folkie. I've got a whole bunch of his records. I love Gordon Lightfoot.
Oh,
Canadian.
where does he fit?
I would have him as a folker more than a folk rocker, but probably
I haven't seen his name anywhere.
it's my fault.
Okay.
That makes me, when I had Saturday night, my wife and I went there talking, saw Croce plays. Croce. It was H.J. Croce, Jim's son.
Oh.
It was excellent.
Good.
He played some of his father's songs, but he did a lot of his own stuff.
Yeah, I just can't cover everybody here, but I'm a big fan of Gordon Lightfoot. I loved his voice. I like Fred Neil was another one. Everybody's talking. It's a fire hose when I'm dealing with this, But I'm definitely going to add a Gordon Lightfoot song because I love his stuff. I love the lyrics, and I've got several of his albums. I saw him at Symphony Hall in Boston when I was back there. Okay. Any questions or comments about folk rock? So we've got Hey Mr. Tambourine Man, the Turtles, Happy Together, the Simon and Garfunkel, Sounds of Silence, Eve of Destruction, and the Buffalo Springfield, Teach Your Children Well. That's another one. They didn't mention Buffalo Springfield either. I mean, that
was a Crosby, Stills and Nash recording. Teach Your Children Well.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, which is
awesome.
Yeah. We've got a few minutes left. Which would you like to hear? That's the one he described with the jingle jangle. I didn't know that story before I did it. Of the basement.
that.
Oh,
great.
can you play the Even Destruction?
Sure.
Please?
The Eastern world, it is exploding, violence flaring, bullets loading. You're old enough to kill, but not for voting. You don't believe in war, but what's that gun you're toting? And even the Jordan River has bodies floating, but you tell me over and over and over again, my friend, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction. Don't you understand what I'm trying to say? Can't you feel the fears I'm feeling today? If the button is pushed, there's no running away. There'll be no one to save with the world in a grave. Take a look around you, boy. It's bound to scare you, boy. And you tell me over and over and over again, my friend, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction. Yeah, my blood's so mad, feels like coagulating. I'm sitting here just contemplating. I can't twist the truth, it knows no regulation. Handful of senators don't pass legislation, and marches alone can't bring integration. When human respect is disintegrating, this whole crazy world is just too frustrating. And you tell me over and over and over again, my friend, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction. Think of all the hate there is in Red China, then take a look around to Selma, Alabama. You may leave here for 4 days in space, but when you return, it's the same old place. The pounding of the drums, the pride and disgrace. You can bury your dead, but don't leave a trace. Hate your next door neighbor, but don't forget to say grace. And tell me over and over and over and over again, my friend, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction. No, no, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction.
On that happy note,
Did you say Rupert?
Barry McGuire.
Oh, he-
Oh, P.J. Sloan wrote it.
yeah.
P.J. Sloan wrote it, but Barry McGuire sang
So it was E.J. Sloan.
it. Did you hear the story that Wilson asked him to write a Dylan type song?
Yeah, yeah.
And this is what he wrote. This is the song he wrote. This was in the lecture we just had.
Well, I know you said that, but then who was Sloan?
I'd never heard of him before this. I didn't know that this lecture taught me that it was written to sound like a Dylan song by someone I'd never heard of.
Yeah.
Other questions, comments?
That's such a powerful song. It's like,
Yeah.
It was powerful.
Destruction, like it's not
Even without that,
now.
even without the video, it's still a powerful song.
I've never seen the video. Sounds indelible.
Yeah.
You know, that reminds me of the song "Call Out the Instigator" by Cannonball Adderley. It's kind of protest song.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I should have done more protests. I really like protest songs. I was just listening to some of them in my collection recently. Like I said, Tom Paxton and Phil Oakes. But this, we've got 2 hours left, and I've got a lot of stuff to do. Any other final thoughts, comments?
Well, speaking of Eva's destruction, 8.5.
Yeah, we know. That's your tax dollars at work.
Your diligence.
No, that's okay. We filed ours this morning, so we're cool.
Oh,
I like that.
oh, they're good.
Don't get you on the fish.
Oh, yeah.
The Go on the Fire Rag. I love that song.
Oh,
What?
Country Joe and the Fish.
Oh, yeah.
Go on the Fire Rag.
Feel like I'm fixing to die right.
Yeah.
Give me an F. At Woodstock, it was F-U-C-K. It was not F-I-S-H.
That's based on Muskrat Ramble by Louis Armstrong.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
I didn't know
the
that.
music. The
Of
Muskrat Ramble by Louis Armstrong.
I never made that connection.
Well, when we were in New Orleans, at the brunch, there was a band playing, and I asked, and they played that. They played Muskrat.
No
Ramble.
kidding.
Yeah.
Okay. I know. I've heard Muskrat Ramble. Any other comment, final questions, thoughts? Okay. See you next week. Thank you.
Okay, what were we going to talk about? Right.